Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 328, Safety and Unsafety in Jewish Life. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And 1 week from today is the holiday of Shavuot, which is traditionally celebrated with two major activities. One is eating dairy products, and the other is staying up all night studying Torah. Well, we can't really, as a digital organization, do much to facilitate your consumption of dairy products, but we can do something about the all-night studying Torah, and we are. So, beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, June 4th, we will have our annual Shavuot Live event with 24 straight hours of Jewish study and conversation, guided by us and some of our favorite guests on the podcast, as well as many listeners and other folks that we know out there who have amazing ideas to share and amazing learning to do together. So if you want to join us for Shavuot Live, just head over to our website, www.judaismunbound.com, and you'll find the registration links there. You can also go to judaismunbound.com/Shavuot 2022. So let's turn to today's conversation. We've talked a lot about how we see art as so significant in the search for new ways of Jewish expression. And today we are talking to two wonderful artists who are also involved with the curation of an exhibit called A Fence Around the Torah, Safety and Unsafety in Jewish Life, an exhibit at the Jewish Museum of Maryland, which you can also see the vast majority of online. Today's conversation is one that, more than most, you might get a lot more out of if you check out the exhibit at their website, which is afencearoundthetorah.com. That's afencearoundthetorah.com. And take a look at some of the pieces. Our show notes for today will have specific links to the pieces that we talk about in the conversation, but you might really enjoy seeing the whole exhibit. A Fence Around the Torah explores manifold discussions on safety and exclusion in Jewish communities. The artists in this exhibition responded to a series of generative questions to highlight the internal conflict over safety and exclusion within Jewish communities and institutions. This work includes personal reflections on queer life in Judaism, racial justice in Jewish spaces, cultural loss and reclamation, political dialogues and dissent, mythological narratives around unsafety, and dreams for inclusion and solidarity coming from within Jewish institutions and the organized Jewish community. Our guests today are Liora Ostroff and Naomi Rose Weintraub. Liora Ostroff is a Baltimore-based painter whose work explores themes such as queerness, Jewishness, violence, and the idiosyncrasies of life in Baltimore. She is the 2021-2022 Curator in Residence at the Jewish Museum of Maryland, where she curated the show A Fence Around the Torah, Safety and Unsafety in Jewish Life. Liora Ostroff graduated from the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2016 with a BFA in painting. Our second guest, Naomi Rose Weintraub, is a mixed media artist based in Baltimore. They are currently working as the Community Artist in Residence at the Jewish Museum of Maryland. Naomi is also part of the RAYJ collective, that's R-A-Y-J, Rebellious Anarchist Young Jews. So we are so excited to welcome these two amazing artist curators to Judaism Unbound, Liora Ostroff, Naomi Rose Weintraub. Welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We're really excited about this conversation. So I am going to start with a kind of question that Lex usually asks, which is about the name of your exhibit, A Fence Around the Torah, Safety and Unsafety in Jewish Life. Can you talk about what that exhibit is all about, why that name? And I guess I'm sort of curious about whether the name drove the exhibit or something else drove the exhibit and then you came up with the name.
So this was actually the fifth option for the name, maybe fifth or sixth. I think that originally I had chosen a different line from Pirkei Avot, but it was still kind of subtitled Safety and Unsafety in Jewish Life. And the other line was vetoed for sounding too religious, which I think is funny because Fence Around the Torah also sounds pretty religious if you think about it. I really wanted the title to be something from Pirkei Avot and not just Safety and Unsafety in Jewish Life, because I think that Pirkei Avot, which means ethics of our forefathers, is still a really fresh and relevant source for ethics and for kind of like a political discourse in Jewish life, kind of like a TV show from the 90s, like the parts of the Tanakh are not entirely relevant or politically correct or an appropriate source for this kind of thing. But if you read it through a certain lens, Pirkei Avot is highly relevant. It's highly aligned with a lot of leftist politics and abolition and mutual aid and equity. And I think that's also why a lot of organizations, I'm thinking of like If Not Now and Not Free to Desist, also take their names from Pirkei Avot. The title that I had originally selected from Pirkei Avot was For the Sake of Heaven. And then I was joking that because the exhibition right before this one was Jews in Space from YIVO, that we would call it Jews in Safe Space. All along, the goal of the exhibition was to talk about safety and unsafety in Jewish life through what I considered to be a sort of abolitionist framing, which meant that, like a lot of contemporary abolitionists in the police and prisons abolition movement, I wanted to use generative questions as a framing device, questions that really allow us to think about how the world can be different. And I wanted the exhibition to talk about the internal dynamic and the internal conversation over safety, including responses to anti-Semitism and to white supremacist violence, and also to physical and emotional danger for marginalized community members, and also how Jewish communities interact with our neighbors.
So, yeah, Dan did steal my question about the name. I love talking about the names of things. I think that it's worth going a little deeper even on the Fence Around the Torah front, because that phrase, I think there's like the literal context that it's used in Pirkei Avot, which is right at the beginning, by the way. For those who aren't, Pirkei Avot buffs, this is in Avot 1:1, the first Mishnah, the first part of the first chapter. It's right there at the beginning. And what I think is so interesting about it is that it's used in some ways that I think many of us would like nod our heads and smile at, build a fence around the Torah, like in a sense, protect the Torah, right? Or protect Torah, protect teaching, protect Judaism. Like that's good, right? And then it's also used as something not to do for people who are critical, including us, of institutions that might be prioritizing, certain senses of safety over the safety of everyone in the community. We might say, like, you're building too many fences around the Torah. So I wanted to hear a little more, like, how are people that you featured in this exhibit, or how are folks that you interact with generally using that phrase, fence around the Torah? What are you getting at there beyond just the shout out to that text?
So I think that many artists in the Jewish community, ones who are a part of this exhibit and also just in the larger like Jewish art community in at least the US, there is a very deep conversation happening about how we can use art and culture to disrupt and shift, really root the future of the Jewish community in collective liberation and serious reparations for harm that's been done. And I think I'm personally really interested in how, when we continue and look towards ancestral traditions, we're turning our backs on assimilation, and how we're actually choosing a path of rebellion by continuing to look to like the past. And this is like that concept of reinventing ritual, but that's not a new thing in the Jewish community, but that's also not a new thing in art either, looking back and then reinventing something. And I think that's like a really, really big piece of why this show was able to speak so loudly, because we're bringing culture to that conversation. We're bringing art into the conversation of how we can stretch Jewish institutional spaces to be more imaginative of what we can do beyond binaries, beyond linear time, beyond domination, and do that in an explicitly Jewish way.
Unsafety was an intentional word choice. Part of the reason that I chose that word was because I don't think that this exhibition is talking so much about real danger. Some parts of it are talking about real danger, like real physical danger, emotional danger, but unsafety is more about your perception of the situation. And I think that everybody in Jewish life has some sense of unsafety in their life, either because they're actively afraid of white supremacist violence or because their own identity isn't fully affirmed by their community. Unsafety is a more nuanced word. It's also like a less, it has less associations built into it because it's a little more unfamiliar. And for me, it has a lot of strong associations because of where I've heard it.
In addition to working as the community artist in residence at the Jewish Museum, I contributed to the exhibit as my artist collective that I'm in with my sibling Ami, which is called Rage Collective, standing for Rebellious Anarchist Young Jews. And we were interested in being a part of this exhibit and that word unsafety as it relates to us as specifically anarchist Jews, and not separate our identities as Jewish people with our identities as anarchists. So my contribution to the exhibit, Jewish Ritual as a Rebellion, was actually first created for a senior thesis art show in college. And it's a multimedia installation in its first form where I invited people to have public events in that space that I created with like projecting the video and making space for Shabbat ritual, etc. And yeah, this piece really is about fighting assimilation in a lot of ways, in the new way that we're talking about assimilation within leftist Jewish communities. So the song is really trying to focus that we can use Jewish ritual to help guide people to a more rebellious path. And I think those are some of the questions that the show A Fence Around the Torah really is good at encouraging its viewers to wrestle with, and like truly wrestle with, not just like think about when you're reading a little article and you flip it through, but like truly putting yourself in the situation of what is my safety within the Jewish community, what is my unsafety, and how am I fighting for other people, just for collective liberation and within the Jewish community and with that and outside of it.
So I have a question, and the answer might be really direct. You might actually just have an answer to my question, but you may actually not have an answer, and you may be able to reveal some of the tricks of the trade of museum curation in answering this. Because fundamentally, my question is, who is safe and who is unsafe? And if you can just answer it, great. But if the answer is that this is what we explore in an exhibit like this, then can you explain a little bit how the work of museum curation brings one into this exploration, and what is the hope that you have for somebody who walks in or now goes into the website of this exhibit and sees it online? What do you imagine is that journey for that person?
Well, I think that when people hear the name of the exhibition, and particularly the subtitle, Safety and Unsafety in Jewish Life, everybody imagines that it's relevant to their own experience in Jewish life. For some people, seeing what the exhibition is about and seeing the categories that it actually explores is a bit of a disappointment, because it's not entirely about white supremacist violence or entirely about how American Jews relate to Israel. It's really about internal dynamics. So we had a section called Queer Life in Judaism, and a lot of the artists outside of that section are also queer. And we had a section called Security, which kind of talked about how different people in Jewish communities experience security systems. So that includes like through racialized encounters with security, and also through the sense that increased policing doesn't actually make us safer. There was a whole section that was called Dialogues, which I would describe as being about the dialogue around safety and around dialogues between generations. I think that one of the most potent sections was Dissent, which was talking about the unsafety of having certain conversations in Jewish communities, which I think is also a lot about what Judaism Unbound is about and part of what the inspiration was. But I developed all of these sections after the work had been selected, and when I was looking at all of the work, I noticed a lot of common threads, and I think that I organized it in a way that is really powerful to a lot of people who relate to those sections, and it also could have been organized completely differently. Also, there are sections that are missing from it. We only have one piece that really addresses white supremacist violence, which is Naomi's sibling, Ami, created a poster that responds to the 2018 shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue. I could easily imagine an exhibition that has more of that work, and actually we received more submissions that had to do with that. But I felt that Ami's contribution on that subject was the most powerful because Ami had a direct connection to it. I think another thing that I just want to keep in mind in relation to Naomi and Ami's work and the security section was that something that was heavy on my mind while planning this was that the show is taking place in Baltimore, and Baltimore has a long and pretty sinister history with the police. And particularly having lived here during the uprisings after the murder of Freddie Gray, it seemed to me that the way that we handle that issue and the way that we talk about white supremacist violence and also police and security systems generally has to be grounded in the fact that the exhibition took place here in this city, and this city has that history.
Yeah. There was a moment right at the beginning of this conversation where, Liora, you said, it might have been the first thing you said, actually, one of the first things. The name was our fifth option. And that's fascinating to me because I don't know that many people that get to a fifth option on anything. The idea that you would have four things that you give a chance and then you go with the fifth one. What that points to is like a really deliberate process. And I think that it doesn't stun me that somebody who is constructing a museum exhibition and somebody who is an artist would go that deliberate route and really take time and think really carefully about the name. And, what's the difference between having a shout out to this verse of text versus that verse of text? How will that change the experience? Like, that's really interesting to me. And it points to a broader set of questions about the exhibit, which is like how it was organized for like the physical setup of it in the museum space, but also how it is organized digitally, because it's still an exhibit. It's just taking place in a different format now. It's online. And so I was curious about what it looked like to sort of take these really cool contributions of people and arrange them in a way to not only like, it's not like a random collage, right? Like you grouped them in a certain way and you ordered, I think you ordered them in the museum space itself, less so online. But talk us through that.
I spent a lot of time looking over all of the work after we had deliberated about what would be in the show and why. And the idea for how to organize it in these sections kind of came out of the fact that I wanted a harmonious online and offline experience. I was looking at other examples of virtual exhibitions, and I was really inspired by one that the Smithsonian put together called Men of Change, which was portraits of and by Black men. And the way that it was organized was kind of similarly in sections. And I decided that these organized sections could be a way to take somebody carefully through this exhibition and also encourage them to find their own common threads. I guess another thing that I wanted to do in ordering that way was kind of use certain pieces to frame the others. And so if you walk into the exhibition and you just walk straight, you start in the dissent section. And Danielle Durschlag's film, Dangerous Opinions, sets you up to kind of think about what's safe to say and when. And similarly, Judith Joseph's work, which was about Baruch Spinoza and his excommunication from the Jewish community, kind of gives a nod to how enduring the subject of dissent and exclusion or excommunication can be in Jewish communities. Most of the people who have experienced the exhibition have experienced it online, and a lot of people now have experienced it in what we've been calling virtual experiences, which are sort of like virtual tours. My goal was to really use them as a space for dialogue and to get people to talk about the work, what it brought up for them and how different pieces made them feel and whether they had associations from it. And I think that both online and in person, the artwork really does elicit those responses from people and open up conversations in ways that I think only art can. And it's challenging to try to run a discussion on Zoom. People are shy. It's like it takes an enormous amount of effort to press the unmute button. And so I've been, tweaking this presentation over and over again. And lately I've been encouraging people to drop a few words in the chat box, which I think actually lets people express themselves more succinctly sometimes than if they're speaking. And it's also easier to be brave in the chat box. Yeah, I would say that the idea that it had to be virtual was a huge part of curating it and splitting it up into these sections and trying to draw out these common threads.
It's like the next exhibit's going to be safety and unsafety and online Jewish experiences. People
that would be a good one, honestly.
Yeah.
There should have been a Facebook section.
Yeah,
for sure. I really want to go back to that question about how you curated the exhibit and how you built the exhibit, because I'm curious about the idea that you're kind of working with what's submitted. Although you said that you got a lot of pieces on unsafety due to white supremacy and you decided to only show one. But I was thinking, before you said that, I was thinking, part of the process of putting out a subject for a show and then calling for art is that what you get is kind of a sign of what artists have passion about. And that's something that strikes me as worth probing as to whether artists have passion for things that are different from what non-artists have passion about, or perhaps that artists have passion for something that the community as a whole has not yet come to grips with.
When we opened the exhibition, someone came up to me at one point with a question, and he wanted to know, he said to me, I see the references to LGBTQ Jews and to right-wing anti-Semitism, but what about left-wing anti-Semitism? And I'd have to be completely honest in saying we got no submissions that relate to that, not because there aren't Jews that are interested in that, but because that is generally not a concern of like the overwhelmingly left-leaning Jewish arts population. Like Jewish artists definitely are to some extent concerned with different things than the general population. And I think also Jewish artists are there's a higher percentage of queer Jewish artists. And so I think that saying that this is really reflective of Jewish communities would be false. But I also think, as an artist myself, one of the things that artists do really well is push things forward that might be kind of in the background or kind of express deeper truths and deeper anxieties that a lot of people in the community are feeling.
Yeah, I think that art also opens this really crucial space for dreaming the world that we want to make. I like to say olam haba, meaning the world to come. It's like used in a lot of different ways in Judaism to mean like, so some people would say that olam haba is the Messiah. That's not necessarily what I'm thinking of it as. I think of it more as, this world that at a basic level, people are supported to be creative, to have full liberation. And I think within the Jewish arts community, there's a lot of using art and culture to imagine what could come, what we could be doing differently to disrupt the status quo of not only the Jewish community now, but the larger just like society of the world.
I did want to talk about the fact that the Jewish Museum has this exhibit. Like, that's interesting, right? I think it's interesting for a few reasons. One, there's some dicey subject matter here, right? That certain kinds of, centralized Jewish institutions with relationships to like the broader Jewish community, it's kind of, you're opening up can of worms on purpose. Like, let's have some stuff that thinks about political red lines in Judaism. Let's think about some stuff through art that looks at racial boundaries that are constructed in Judaism, like hard things. And also, like, Jewish museums, I think when people hear that term, they think like preservation, history, right? Like, let's go to the Jewish museum to learn what Jews have done in the past, right? And I don't think that's what Jewish museums actually are. I do think that's what many people think they are. And so I guess I'd love to hear from the two of you, like, why does it matter for Jewish museums? Why is it important for us to like blur the line between spaces like museums that often are looking at the past and preserving the past, with what you're doing, which is in a sense like preserving something that is very much of the present and looking toward the future through this art?
I have noticed in my own practice and in a lot of my art community members' practice that especially for Jewish artists, we're either responding to Jewish time, the holidays, the Jewish calendar, or we're responding like politically. In a lot of ways, a lot of my art, a lot of my art that I would say is explicitly Jewish was actually coming from a place of my political organizing. Whether that's someone asking me to make a poster for a Jewish organization, or if it's me trying to respond to something that's happening within my community through art. And then in the other sense, I make a lot of art for like high holidays with different synagogues, or making art for events like Purim spiels. And I think as the Jewish Museum of Maryland, we don't just exist within like the history that happened in the past when the neighborhood that we were in was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, or, you know, just thinking about the people who used to exist, the ancestors that are the legacy that we want to carry on. But we're really trying to think about the community that we're currently a part of. Using art is a very key way to really make that bridge to the community. And just to say also, like, one of our goals as a museum for the coming years is really this idea of the participatory museum, and making it clear that this is an open space for people to come and share their stories with understanding of rootedness in the past, but also trying to move forward.
When I first started talking to Saul Davis, the executive director of the museum, I came to this conversation with a bit of skepticism, because in my mind, the Jewish Museum was a place where there were semi-gimmicky history exhibitions, and it was a place where we took the Hebrew school students on Sundays. It actually never occurred to me that the Jewish Museum could put up something super relevant or artful or exciting, but he told me that it's not called the Jewish History Museum, that we could use it as a place to explore the Jewish future. And I don't know what the Jewish future will be, so I'm more interested in the Jewish contemporary. But it also seemed obvious to me that Jewish culture is very alive, like on Instagram and on this podcast on Judaism Unbound, that living Jewish culture is the most exciting way into Jewish tradition. And I think that art really opens up conversations. And one of the things that I was most excited about doing in the Jewish Museum space was giving people a place to have a conversation and to bring together different groups that ordinarily don't interact, at least in our Baltimore Jewish community. It seemed to me that an art exhibition that was framed with questions and framed around really dense topic would be a great conversation starter. Jewish history is also a great conversation starter, but in a different way. And a lot of the times people are skittish about relating Jewish history in a meaningful way to the Jewish contemporary. Like the current exhibition up at the JMM is called Blacklist, and it's about the Hollywood Red Scare. But I think that you could easily put up an exhibition like this and not talk at all about the ways that conversations or politics are restrained in our lives today. You could talk about it solely as a facet of history. What's really exciting about this direction for this museum is that we're really concerned with bringing it into contemporary life. Preservation isn't the goal. The goal is to enrich our lives now and to enrich our conversations now. One of the things that kept coming up during our virtual presentations where we were having people discuss things was that they felt they were able to say things and respond in ways that hadn't felt safe or even appropriate in other contexts. And so art has that ability to open up a conversation in a completely radically different way. Because if you say, I'm responding to Danielle Durschlag's video and to the discomfort that the character feels after criticizing Israel and then being booed, then I can talk about my own experience with dissent on that topic through the character and through the narrative in the film, which is in a lot of ways easier and more open-ended than just talking about your own experience.
I want to talk specifically about a piece that me and Ami brought to the show as the Rage Collective and is now the title of the Jewish Museum of Maryland's podcast, Disloyal. The piece is a poster with an accompanying poem, and it specifically was made as a collective in response to when Trump said that American Jews who vote for Democrats show either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. And the poem is really talking about, okay, then we're disloyal. So the poem really talks about all these different ways that Jews are disloyal and calls in a lot of different like Jewish practices and holidays and saying, yeah, we are the ones who wrestle with God whenever we dream, while we stand and pray, when we ask our ancestors, not our armies, to gather and shield us. And so really bringing in this idea of like, we're going to hear you and take this thing that you said about us and turn it into our greatest strength, and like actually like moving from that rage into the liberation and the beautiful world that we're trying to build. One of my favorite lines from the poem says, "Together our beauty turns your curses into blessings." And I really think that that's part of what we're talking about when we mean like fighting assimilation as Jewish artists and coming back to ourselves as Jewish people, and a practice that sometimes feels like, you know, the only Jewish experience is an Ashkenazi experience. We need to be standing with Israel at all times. We need to have conservative values. And I'm curious how we can be disloyal to that narrative.
I want to sit with that, and I want to like bring my own selfish autobiographical stuff to that for a second. Because like the word loyal has fascinated me for a while, loyalty and disloyalty. Like growing up, for some reason, I don't know why this is. Others can tell me if I'm alone in this or if they're like this too. I associate the word loyal with dogs.
We should point out that Lex is a cat person.
Yeah, I'm more of a cat person. But like growing up, the word loyal, it's just an adjective I associate with dogs. And I'm not here to say that's a bad thing. It's not. But I never had this sense, like somehow I missed the day in school where like loyalty was taught as this really key, crucial, positive thing. I think my main association with loyalty was like, it's kind of neutral. And if you're loyal to something that's good, like I want to be loyal to my friends, right? Like that's good. If I'm loyal to a state apparatus like the United States or like Israel or like any other state apparatus, like the idea that that's this sort of unquestioned good in the world, at the very least, I think it's like, maybe it's neutral, right? And really, I think I'd start to say like, is that actually how I want to structure the world? Like, even if I were somebody who had less skepticism about states than me, I still don't know that I would want people's primary loyalties to be like to nations, right? Or to flag. There's pledges of allegiance. As a high schooler, before I had any kind of real political consciousness, I stopped saying the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning. It just felt weird to me. Like, why? Why are we pledging allegiance to a flag, but really a flag standing in for a nationalism? Something about seeing some art and reading some words in your exhibit provoked like a whole through line of me thinking about that like think pieces didn't. You know, I'm also struck by the fact that this next exhibition at the Jewish Museum of Maryland is about like McCarthyism, right? And blacklists and how people were called disloyal, right? And disproportionately, the people that were called disloyal were Jews. I guess what I'm asking is, there's something about that poem that, Naomi, you invoked that pulls me to this like ranty, intense place that I actually want to be in, like this passion place that reading, I've read stuff about the word loyalty and I don't leave them feeling that way. So like, I guess I'm asking a broad question about like what art does, but like, how do y'all feel about that?
I think one piece that I have been forgetting to mention is that a lot of Jewish artists, and me as a Jewish artist, I believe in diasporism. I believe like Jewish people don't belong to a state. And so it's like when you're talking about being not disloyal to America, when we don't decide not to pledge allegiance, I think Jewish people and the experience of being a Jewish person today is really about understanding that we're not loyal to any state. We're a diasporic people. We're constantly changing, and that in a lot of ways through art, we learn there's no universal Jewish cultural material. There's no single Jewish culture, and that art is really here to kind of show a particular place or an idea or share one piece of something, but that with that deep understanding that Jewish experience today is going to be diasporic and is not allegiant to a specific state. At least that's how I believe. Like, even if people feel super loyal to the state of Israel, for example, I see that as like its own form of choosing to go along with dominating forces. And yeah, I think that's why a lot of Jewish artists are talking about the occupation of Palestine and how we can really make serious moves to fight for the liberation of Palestinian people and also the liberation of all people.
The epithet disloyal came from Donald Trump, and I think that's something that I've been thinking about is how our loyalty to a state or to an idea or to anything can sometimes be put upon us from something outside of the Jewish community. And when we're talking about Zionism and loyalty to the state of Israel or disloyalty, that is most often put upon us by other Jewish people. But if you think deeply about Jewish texts and what they mean, what's expressed in this exhibition is really just a loyalty to equity and to seeing humans all as being in God's image, and a deeper loyalty to the actual truths that that Judaism hopes to expose.
I would love to reflect a little bit with both of you, and maybe starting with Naomi, about your role at the museum. I mean, first off, I remember when we being Judaism Unbound first met you a few years ago, and then at the beginning of the pandemic you ended up making these like gorgeous art pieces, but like helping people learn how to use Zoom. Like, and I say this not because because I think there's something important about that, right? Like, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of the pandemic. I've been using Zoom for years. It's where my rabbinical school was. It's where we've been recording the podcast, whatever. And then all of a sudden everybody was using Zoom and people had to learn it. Right? Like, people had to learn the ins and outs of this program, and it was hard to teach people. But then I don't think we even asked you. I think you just like volunteered to create like this gorgeous visual that, you know, it said some pretty practical stuff. Like, here's where you click to share screen, or here, I don't know. We'll share it in the show notes. But what you did was, through something visually appealing and also deep and eye-catching, you helped us do something that we weren't able to do otherwise. And so I guess I'm curious, in your role at the museum, is this sort of, you know, people ask, you know, what's your superpower? Is this a superpower of yours? Is this something that you attempt to do through the museum, is take things that are not necessarily how to use Zoom, but like things that people might see as boring or whatever, and bring them to life? How does what we learned from you connect to what you're doing at the museum?
Yeah, thanks, Lex. I really appreciate that. It's funny because I kind of forgot that you guys had used that graphic. I actually originally made that graphic because at the beginning, the Zoom graphic specifically, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was really looking for ways to be contributing to mutual aid. And I saw a gap in people knowing how to use technology that helped connect us as a community. And I've been using Zoom for many years and just like made that, and it kind of blew up. Someone like translated it into Swedish, actually, which was cool. But yeah, I mean, as a human being interested in supporting and evolving community, my superpower is art. Like, I'm extremely interested in using art as a tool for social change. And I think if Jewish communities and Jewish institutional world, or the decentralized Jewish communal world, or the centralized Jewish world wants to be active in social change and in transformation, it's going to have to work with artists. I've been working a long time as an artist, as a teaching artist, specifically with youth, and I've been working a long time as a Jewish educator. And when I came to the museum and asked them if this was possible, if this position was possible of being an artist in residence at the Jewish Museum, my big point in it was what you're saying, is that we actually need art in order to restore commitments to social change and commitments to imagination and play and community, which is, I think, in a lot of ways during the pandemic we haven't had the opportunity to really dive into. I want to talk about one project that I've done at the Jewish Museum of Maryland in my residency here. We built an installation where guests of the museum were able to fill out postcards that were specifically saying postcards from 2022 to the Jewish future. And the postcard prompts were things like, I want to help build a Jewish future that values blank, or what is important to you in your Jewish community today? And then the participants would fill out the postcard, hang it on the wall in the museum, and add to this chorus of colorful dreams and ideas for the future, and also things that they appreciate about the Jewish now. And I really think that this project like exemplifies one of the goals of the museum and what I can bring as an artist there, which is to bring imagination, the capacity to push people to be thinking about how to transform a community and help remind people that everyone can be a part of that. I think like art is a really special tool to be making like that strive for a beautiful future more accessible to people.
So just to close us out, Liora, I'm excited to go to you as we end, because you're a painter. And here's the thing, like we talk a lot about art on this show. And one of the most common phrases, I can't prove this, but I bet if you looked at our entire podcast and you looked for like certain key phrases, I bet we've said the phrase like, quote, now we're not talking about necessarily visual art here. We're not talking about painting here, but other kinds of art, unquote. And so I think we've actually, in all of our conversations about art, we've had a few episodes where painting specifically is like kind of the point. But I'd love to hear from you, because we've been kind of focused on forms of art that are others. What's a painter's Torah? Or to the extent this, like, what's your Torah expressed through painting? And as I ask that, I know it's a funny question, because like by definition, it's expressed through stuff you paint and not words that come out of your mouth. I'll put some of those images of things that you've painted into our show notes. But how would you answer that question? Like, what does a painter bring to Jewish experience today that we might need?
I mean, different painters bring totally different things. I mean, Ariel Tonkin, who is one of the artists in the exhibition, is painting portraits of people in their life today. And I tend to think of the work that I make that has more Jewish themes as being sort of midrashic, which refers to kind of like exegetical or reinterpretations or stories having to do with the Bible. But I've been imagining that some of the work that I make is like visual midrash, is like a painting in conversation with the text. And in making that, I'm also thinking about how the text is in conversation with my life and the kind of like visual world that I live in Baltimore. And for me, I think that one of the things that I enjoy about painting and about seeing how other people interact with my paintings is that there's no explicit meaning. People interpret things in so many different ways, and other people sometimes completely miss things that I think are deeply obvious in my paintings. I think that my senior thesis of paintings, which were sort of like super gay sports paintings, were really obviously super gay, and a lot of people didn't notice it, or that wasn't the first thing that came to mind when they were looking at them. Visual art has this way of getting people to state their responses or state their associations and maybe even like draw out their own biases in looking at the work, and to think about not only what they're seeing, but how it relates to their own life or to other things they've seen outside of the artwork. I guess one other thing is that I'm also a Jewish educator, and one of the prompts that I like to give to the kids is, we'll read a story, and I'm not telling you to like make a piece of art or a poem about the story, but it's, make something afterward that's a response to the story. And that's kind of how I think about my midrashic paintings.
I want to just say, as a person working in Jewish community, I'm not interested in sugarcoating or hiding any of my identities as an anarchist, as a queer person. And I think that art has been the most clear tool for me to express those other parts of myself within the Jewish community. And I'm not interested in mystifying those experiences. I want to make those explicit, and I want to make space for people like me within the Jewish community. I also wanted to share that I'm a Jewish art nerd. I'm really into Hidor Mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of beautification, which is literally saying, like, within Judaism, it's a mitzvah to make things cooler and more beautiful and more extravagant and amazing and like wacky and beautiful. And that is very true for my experience of Jewish life. Like if anything, we are wacky and colorful and dazzling. And I think it's really, once you open that door, it's actually really easy to find these connections. I teach a workshop through the museum right now where I'm teaching about Jewish folk arts, and I talk about paper cutting, and I teach about roiselach, which is the paper roses that are made for Shavuos. And like traditionally within Jewish community. And many people that come to my workshops, it brings up these ideas of like, wait, I used to make paper snowflakes growing up, and this is actually like pulling on my heartstrings because I didn't know that this practice was actually a Jewish thing. And so it's like extremely easy to make these connections because Jewish culture is so potent and rich with art making and with making things beautiful and making special spaces for like the Ark, for the Torah. Like we make this special place for our things, and leaning into that as an artist is super exciting. And yeah, again, just gives this venue to be loud and proud about who we are and what we want the Jewish community to make space for. And that's really like the power of this exhibit and the power of bringing artists into Jewish institutional life.
Thank you both so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. Before we fully close with all the ways that you can be in touch with us, a reminder, Dan said this at the top, but Shavuot, our very, very favorite holiday as an organization. Shavuot is coming up. It's coming up really soon as this episode is being released. It's just about a week away. Our event, Shavuot Live, will be on June 4th and 5th. It's 24 hours long, so it's on both of those days. It will start and end at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Start 5 p.m. Eastern on the 4th and 5 p.m. Eastern on the 5th. That's a Saturday and a Sunday. We really hope that you'll join us, and we encourage you to head to our registration page to sign up. You can do that at our website, judaismunbound.com. And you can click the links for Shavuot Live. Or if you want to go straight to the registration page, you can go to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/Shavuot 2022. That'll take you to our registration page. So we hope to see you there. It is among our very, very favorite events every year. We have reached hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. As I record this, we already have 300 people who have registered, and we know that it will be many, many more over the coming weeks as Shavuot gets closer. So we hope to see you there. And now to close in the way we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us. Here are all the ways you can do that. First, there are our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, there's our website, judaismunbound.com. And third, there are our email addresses, dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. The last request we like to make is that we deeply appreciate any amount of financial donation that you're able to send our way. And you can do that via judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.